When Vivienne Carter married Sebastian Cross at 22, everyone said how lucky she was. He was 10 years older, a mafia don with terrifying power in his hands, and yet for 3 years he doted on her alone. He indulged her in everything, kept her sheltered under his wing, tender and attentive down to the smallest detail. Only in the dead of night did he turn possessive and overpowering, taking without limit, never once relenting even when she begged him through tears. She had always been certain she was the one thing he loved. Then her father died without warning. Drowning in grief, she called him 99 times, and every call was cut off. In an instant, a single photo shattered every illusion she had. On a Paris street softened by dusk, the man she'd loved for 3 years was bending to hold another woman. That woman, gentle-featured and faintly resembling her, was her cousin. On the day of my father's funeral, my husband, Sebastian, never came after all. Night fell and Sebastian came home. He saw how pale and worn my face was and reached out to comfort me. I turned my head away. "This is my fault, baby. Something came up in Paris, and I had to deal with it. Whatever you want, I'll make it up to you, okay?" After a long silence, I lifted my hand and slid 2 neatly folded documents across to him. "Sign them." Sebastian looked relieved. Without so much as glancing at what they were, he picked up a pen and signed his name. As far as he was concerned, anything I wanted, whatever it was, he'd agree to without hesitation. "Anything you and the baby need, I'll give you, sweetheart." I'd just opened my mouth to say something when his phone cut sharply through the quiet. The name flashing on the screen was the one he kept pinned at the top and never let me see. Serena. Serena, my cousin. He ended the call and gave an awkward little laugh, then pressed a light kiss to my forehead. "There's a deal I have to close. I've got to go make money for our baby. I'll spend real time with you next time, all right?" He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed his coat and turned to go, hurried, without a trace of reluctance. The house sank into dead silence, the empty space pressing down until it was hard to breathe. I sank slowly back onto the couch. Countless images flooded in without warning. Every small piece of the last 3 years. Sebastian had treated me well, so well that every woman in the city envied me. I slept badly, so for 3 years he held me on his side every night and pulled the blanket over me, never once letting it slip. Whenever we fought, right or wrong, he was always the first to soothe me and the first to apologize. He would swallow his own feelings rather than let me feel slighted, and he never touched work until I had cooled down. Once, in the middle of the night, I wanted to see the rain-soaked streets, and he simply ordered the whole road cleared. Every car was banned, and an entire busy avenue opened quietly for me alone. Back then I drowned in that kind of devotion, endlessly grateful, sure I was the luckiest woman alive. I naively believed that was love, that year after year of safety lay ahead. But the day my father died, 99 unanswered calls and 1 photo of an embrace on a Paris street broke the beautiful 3-year illusion to pieces. After hesitating a long time, I rose from the cold floor and walked to the deepest part of the house, to the hidden basement Sebastian had never let me set foot in. The moment the heavy iron door swung open, a biting cold rushed at me, and the blood in my veins went still. The entire basement was packed full, every inch of it a trace of Serena. Her portraits covered the walls. The shelves held neat rows of candid shots of her, photos from her awkward school years, even doodles she had scribbled without thinking. On the vanity sat the perfume and jewelry she always wore, each piece wiped spotless, each one carefully kept. So every bit of tenderness, every indulgence, every favor he had shown me had never been because I was Vivienne. It was only because I had a face that looked so much like Serena's. The cold swept through me and my heart ached in 1,000 tiny places, yet I could not squeeze out a single tear. It did not matter. He had lied to me for 3 whole years, but this time he was not going to win. I picked up the phone and called immigration to start the paperwork. "Sebastian, let us never see each other again." I bent to pick up the 2 signed documents from the table, my fingertips brushing over his sharp handwriting. The first was the divorce agreement. The second was the abortion consent form. Inside me was a child not yet 2 months along, one I had once pinned all my hopes on, believing this bond could tether his tenderness to me. Now I saw the child was nothing but the most ridiculous accessory to this absurd deception. "Sebastian, cling to the obsession you will never have for the rest of your life. I hoped you would spend every year in regret and never once feel whole." When Sebastian came home, I was sorting through all my clothes and jewelry. He probably assumed I was just in a bad mood and wanted new things to lift my spirits. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his palms warm, his voice soft with indulgence. "There's an auction in a few days. I'll take you to pick out new pieces, and I'll stay close and make it up to you." I said nothing, letting him hold me, too tired even to offer a polite smile. His gaze drifted to my waist and stopped. He seemed to notice that the slight swell of my belly from the week before was flat again. He was about to ask when his phone rang. It was my uncle. The gentle voice on the other end asked if I wanted to come by for a gathering. Serena was back from abroad. Serena, my cousin. Before I could react, Sebastian had already accepted for us. He had completely forgotten that my father had been buried only days ago, that I was still sunk in the grief of losing him. He spared me not an ounce of thought, not a shred of consideration. He hung up, let go of me, and turned to open the safe, taking out a box of lavish custom jewelry. He pressed the heavy gift box into my hands. You two haven't seen each other in ages. Here's a gift. Pass it along to Serena from me, to welcome her home. I looked down at the box and nodded, as compliant as some outsider who did not matter. Dinner was held at my uncle's house. The room was full of family and friends, loud with laughter. I looked at the beef and lamb in my bowl, and did not touch a bite. Since getting pregnant, I had suffered terrible morning sickness. The sight of meat turned my stomach, and Sebastian had eaten vegetarian alongside me for 2 months. But today he did not think of it at all, pushing every delicate vegetarian dish on the table toward Serena. When dinner ended, we stayed at the old mansion together. Late in the night, the warmth beside me quietly vanished. I had expected it. I got up and pushed the bedroom door open. Sebastian's voice carried a seriousness and an obsession he had never shown me. All these years, there has only ever been you. Vivienne was a stand-in from the very start. Stay this time for my sake, won't you? Serena's voice held a note of dismay and helplessness. Are you out of your mind? She's carrying your child. How can you treat her like this? I'm perfectly clear-headed. His tone was certain, fully arrogant. She loves me too much. No matter what happens, she'll never leave me. At those words, I let out a quiet laugh. I raised my hand and brushed it lightly over my flat stomach. Sebastian, you really do not know me at all. You think I will stay trapped in this fake love, clinging to it on my knees. But you do not know that I let go a long time ago. Not the child, not you. The woman you were so sure would never leave had already planned her clean exit. That night, he never came back to the room. In the faint light of early morning, I slipped without a sound out of the house that had trapped 3 years of my honest heart, and went to file my immigration papers. The next day at noon, a friend I had not seen in a while asked me to lunch. We sat across from each other, talking softly, and I tried to ease the gloom that had built up inside me. But fate insisted on grinding away the last scrap of my dignity. When I looked up, I suddenly saw 2 familiar figures. Sebastian walked in front, tall and refined, his suit immaculate. Beside him, shoulder to shoulder, was Serena. The instant our eyes met, Sebastian stopped short, surprise and a flicker of panic churning in his gaze. Almost at once he came toward me, his words rushed, deliberately covering and explaining. Vivienne, listen to me. I was at the office all morning. I just ran into Serena over lunch, that's all. We only happened to eat together. Every line was forced, every word guilty. Before I could speak, Serena gave a gentle little smile. Vivienne, what a coincidence. If you don't mind, why don't you and your friend join us? It's livelier with more people. With the moment at an impasse and no way to refuse, I gave a faint nod and moved with my friend to their table. Before long, a server came over carrying a tureen of scalding soup. Just as the dish was about to touch the table, Serena rose, saying she was going to the restroom. She swayed slightly, and her arm knocked against the server's wrist. The boiling soup spilled out all at once. It held nothing back. Half of it splashed across the back of Serena's hand, and the other half came down hard on my forearm and shoulder. The searing pain shot through my skin at once, spreading in a raw, prickling wave. The fabric stuck to the burn, and the ache left my fingertips trembling. But in the next instant, every bit of Sebastian's attention, all of his alarm, landed on Serena. Are you all right? Is it bad? Don't be scared, I'll get you to a hospital right now. My friend froze, stunned, then quickly pulled out napkins to wipe the soup away, aching for me. I looked down at the wide, red, burning wound on my arm and shook my head. The pain inside me had long since drowned out the pain of the burn. So favoritism really could go that far. Even though I was just as badly hurt, even though I was his lawful wife, in his eyes the smallest scratch on Serena was worth losing his composure over. While I could be covered in wounds and never deserve a single shred of care, I bore the pain alone, and with my friend beside me went to the same hospital to have the wound treated. After a careful examination, the doctor frowned and said plainly that the burn was large and deep, that the skin was badly damaged, and that it needed dressing and rest to heal. It was then that Sebastian, having seen to Serena's hand, finally showed up. He must have caught the doctor's account and realized I was the more seriously hurt, because a faint trace of guilt finally crossed his face. He came to my bedside. Doctor, please take extra care. She's pregnant, so be cautious with any medication or treatment. The moment he said it, the doctor was about to ask about the pregnancy and explain my condition. My chest tightened. I reached out at once and lightly pressed the doctor's arm, shaking my head faintly to stop the rest of his words. Once the wound was treated, I leaned back against the headboard and fell into a heavy sleep. At midnight, the ward was utterly silent. I woke with a start from a shallow sleep. The dark around me was still, and from the next room came low, hushed voices that drifted clearly into my ears. Serena, all these years I have never let you go. I was a fool before, a coward, too afraid to face my own heart, so I got by on Vivienne's shadow. Serena's voice was reluctant and hesitant. Have you really lost your mind? You have been married to Vivienne for 3 years. She depends on you, she loves you. How can you just let her go like that? I'm thinking clearly. Sebastian's voice was unshakable. I only married her because she looks like you. These 3 years were a compromise, something to soothe an obsession. If you'll come back, if you'll stay with me, I'll divorce Vivienne right away, cleanly, and give you a real place in my life. For the rest of my days, there will be only you. The Don needs an heir. Once she has the child, I'll be with you, Serena. Every word was sincere, every line final. So my 3-year marriage, my 3 years of love, had been nothing from beginning to end, but the interval in which he waited for the woman he truly wanted to come back. I sat quietly on the cold hospital bed, the burn on my arm throbbing in waves, though it was not a fraction of the pain in my chest. I did not cry, and I did not make a scene. I only lifted the blanket in silence and got out of bed. The night was deep, the corridor cold and empty. Without a sound I turned and walked back to my own room, burying every absurd, heartless word deep inside me. I did not sleep at all. The next morning, just as it grew light, the door of my room was thrown open. Sebastian rushed in, his face frantic, his eyes bloodshot, his whole body radiating menace and agitation. He strode to my bedside and bent down, staring me dead in the eye, his voice cold and savage, full of accusation and suspicion. Vivienne, did you do this? I lifted my eyes and looked at him calmly. He clenched his fists, his eyes full of distrust and misplaced fury, every word sharp and cold. You heard me and Serena last night. Did you turn bitter and hire someone to kidnap her on purpose? I'm warning you. His expression was vicious, colder and more merciless than I had ever seen. If anything happens to Serena, I don't care who you are, I don't care how much you love me, I will never let you off. Sebastian pulled every connection and every ounce of power he had, searching the whole city like a man possessed. After a full day and night, he finally got Serena back. Sebastian, this had nothing to do with Vivienne. She didn't do it. You've got her wrong. That one short sentence shattered all of Sebastian's suspicion and certainty in an instant. He went rigid, the menace draining from his eyes, replaced by heavy shock and a belated trace of guilt. A moment later he walked into my room. Vivienne, I'm sorry. I was rash. I blamed you wrongly. So no matter how I explained myself, it counted for nothing next to one light sentence from Serena. After I was discharged, I went back alone to the house full of false tenderness. One by one I gathered up the expensive, exquisite gifts and tossed them into a discard box. There was no reluctance and no regret, only a complete sense of release. I did not want a shred of the affection built on lies. Once Sebastian had settled things with Serena, he hurried back to the house. Vivienne, stop sulking. It was my fault. I'll never let you feel slighted again. I'll buy all of it back for you. Don't be angry, okay? He fumbled to make amends, soothing me out of habit with lavish gifts and soft words, certain that, as always, a little coaxing would bring me around. But my calm and my indifference unsettled him more than any hysterics could have. He was about to say more when the phone in his pocket rang urgently. A rushed, panicked voice on the line told him Serena had suddenly developed acute leukemia. Her condition was dangerous, and she urgently needed a marrow match or her life would be at risk. The color drained from Sebastian's face. Without a moment's hesitation, he rushed to the hospital. Everyone from Serena's family and all of Sebastian's relatives came to the hospital to be tested, but one after another the results came back, and not a single one matched. Every hope collapsed. The mood outside the ward was heavy with despair as Serena's body grew weaker, and her life hung in the balance. In the thick of his anxiety, Sebastian turned to where I stood quietly in the corner, his tone hard and brooking no refusal. Vivienne, you get tested too. The moment he spoke, an elder beside us cut in, full of worry. Sebastian, no. Vivienne is still pregnant. She absolutely cannot take that risk. Everyone was thinking of my body, of the child I had once carried. Only Sebastian had eyes for nothing but the dying Serena. His face was hard, his tone final, utterly unmoved, every word cutting. There can be other pregnancies later. There is only one Serena. Next to her life, this little risk isn't worth mentioning. As the words landed, the room fell completely silent. I stood where I was, eyes lowered, as the last faint, trivial hope inside me crumbled to ash. In his eyes my body, my child, and my life could never measure up to Serena's slightest comfort. I did not argue and I did not resist. I went along and gave the marrow sample. After a few days' wait, the results came back. I was not a match. Everyone quietly breathed easier, all but Sebastian, whose eyes filled with heavy disappointment and defeat. Just as everyone neared despair, word came from the hospital that the one perfect marrow match had been found. That afternoon, passing the study, I heard low voices through the half-open door, Sebastian and the doctor. Every word was clear, and everyone cut deep. It's confirmed. The only match is you, Don. Acute leukemia can't wait. Your marrow is the only hope of saving Miss Brooks. The next second came Sebastian's voice, steady and certain, without a trace of hesitation. I know. Schedule the procedure immediately and get the transplant to Serena as soon as possible. Keep this strictly confidential. Don't let Vivienne find out. The doctor sounded uneasy. Dawn, marrow donation takes a serious toll on the body. You will need a long recovery afterward. Are you sure? I'm sure. As long as it saves Serena, a little damage is nothing. I'll come up with an excuse afterward. Say there's urgent business that needs me overseas, and that I'll be away for a while. Once the surgery's done and she's fully recovered, everything will be fine. I stood outside the door, my fingertips cold, a clear and total emptiness settling in my heart. So that was it. For Serena, he would gamble his own health and give everything, without a backward glance. My child and I, by contrast, had always been nothing more than disposable accessories in his life. On the day of the surgery, bright sunlight fell through the glass into the front hall. I walked up to him and held out a plain white gift box. For you, I said evenly. He took it for a peace offering now that I had cooled down. Relieved, he reached out and accepted the box, but did not open it. His mind was entirely on Serena waiting in the operating room. With no attention to spare for me, he offered an offhand reassurance. When I'm back from my business trip, I'll spend real time with you. With that, he turned and hurried off, and lay down in the operating room. The heavy doors of the operating room swung slowly shut, sealing away every obsession he had chased. At the same time, at the airport on the edge of the city, dragging a single suitcase, my immigration visa already in hand, I turned and boarded a flight to a faraway country. The plane lifted off and broke through the clouds, looking down on the city that had trapped 3 years of my love, 3 years of my honest heart. At last I was free. There was no gift in his box. There was only a clean medical report confirming the abortion, and a divorce agreement already signed and in effect. The white gift box sat unopened on the bedside table in the private recovery suite of St. Jude's Hospital. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the afternoon sun had dipped behind the skyline, casting long, bruised shadows across the room. The scent of antiseptic was suffocating, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and intravenous saline. Sebastian Cross lay on the electric bed, his face unusually pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. The bone marrow extraction had been extensive, too thick. Needles had pierced his pelvic bone hours prior, leaving a dull, searing ache that throbbed with every shallow breath he took. Yet, as he slowly blinked open his dark eyes, his first thought was not of the physical toll on his body. It was of Serena. Don Cross, his chief lieutenant Nikolai, spoke quietly from the corner of the room, stepping forward with his hands folded in front of his suit. Miss Brooks has been moved to the sterile isolation unit. The transplant was executed without complication. The chief surgeon estimates her marrow acceptance rate will be above 90%. Sebastian let out a weak, raspy exhale. His hand, heavy and numb, reached out toward his phone on the nightstand. Good. His fingers brushed against the smooth, matte surface of the white gift box Vivienne had handed him before he entered the surgical wing. For you, she had said. Her voice had been so flat, so utterly devoid of the warmth that used to fill his home, that he had assumed she was merely nursing a silent grudge. He had figured she was acting out because he had neglected her. For Serena's medical crisis. She'll get over it, he had told himself then. She always does. She loves me too. Much to leave. Give me the box, Sebastian grunted, shifting his weight against the pillows. A sharp spike of pain shot through his lower back, forcing a faint grimace from his lips. Nikolai picked up the white box and handed it to him. Sebastian pulled off the lid. There was no tissue paper, no ribbon, no handwritten note expressing her usual doting worry for his health. Inside lay only 2 documents. The first was a formal medical record from a private clinic on the outskirts of the city, stamped in red ink across the top margin. Clinical termination of pregnancy, surgical abortion complete. Sebastian's breath caught in his throat. The room seemed to plunge into an unnatural, freezing silence. His dark pupils shrank to tiny black pinpricks as his eyes scanned the clinical text below. Patient, Vivienne Carter. Gestational age, 8 weeks. Procedure date, October 14th. Complications, none. Patient cleared for international travel. No. Sebastian whispered, his voice cracking into a dry, hollow rasped sound. This is a mistake. He remembered the slight swell of her belly a week ago. He remembered how she had stood in the bedroom, staring at her flat stomach, her face pale and silent. He had assumed she was suffering from morning sickness. He had assumed she was keeping his child safely inside her. She hadn't lost the baby. She had erased it. She had walked into an operating theater alone, while he was searching the city for Serena, and wiped away the only physical bond that tied her to him. His hands began to shake violently, clutching the thin paper so tightly that his Knuckles turned translucent. Beneath the abortion report lay the second document. A bilateral divorce decree. Signed in clear, elegant, unyielding black ink. Vivienne Carter. Attached to the decree was a formal notice from the State Immigration Bureau, confirming that Vivienne's citizenship relinquishment had been processed 3 days prior. Her status within the country was legally void. Nikolai, Sebastian gasped, his chest heaving as he tried to push himself upright. The 4-line in his arm pulled taut, the clear plastic tube filling with a sudden surge of dark red blood. Nikolai, where is she? Nikolai looked down at the paper in his Don's hands, his stoic face suddenly breaking into a mask of pure shock. Don Cross, Mrs. Cross was at the mansion this morning. She's not at the mansion. Sebastian roared, ripping the 4 catheter straight out of his vein. Blood squirted across his hospital gown and onto the white sheets. Call the airport. Block the private harbors. Shut down every border. Exit in the province now. Don Cross, your surgery, you can't stand. Nikolai lunged forward to support him, but Sebastian shoved him aside with a terrifying, animalistic fury. He tore off the heart monitors, the blood pressure cuffs, his body staggering under the sheer agony in his pelvis. He didn't care about the marrow loss. He didn't care about the Cross Syndicate. He didn't even look toward the isolation unit where Serena lay sleeping. He stumbled out of the VIP suite into the blinding white corridor, clutching the 2 sheets of paper to his chest, screaming her name like a madman into the empty halls. Vivienne. By midnight, the storm had broken over the city, hurling sheets of freezing rain against the grand wrought iron gates of the Cross estate. The mansion was ablaze with light. Dozens of black SUVs sat idling along the cobblestone driveway, their headlights cutting through the downpour. Over 200 armed syndicate operatives were scouring every inch of the estate, their boots squeaking against the polished marble floors. Sebastian stood in the center of the master bedroom. He still wore his blood-stained hospital trousers and a black coat tossed hastily over his bare shoulders. His face was ghastly pale, sweat dripping from his forehead as he leaned heavily against the mahogany bedpost, his hands clenching into fists until his fingernails bit into his palms. Don Cross. Nikolai stepped into the room, his clothes soaked through with. Then, he lowered his head, his voice trembling slightly. The flight manifests have been pulled from all 3 international terminals. A private charter departed for Zurich at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Name, Vivienne Carter. Passport, Swiss Federal. Sebastian didn't move. He stared at the walk-in closet in front of him. The doors were wide open. Every single piece of jewelry he had ever bought her, the 50-carat diamonds from Geneva, the custom platinum necklaces, the emerald rings he had used to coax her after their fights, sat neatly aligned inside the velvet display cases. On her vanity table, not a single stone was missing. Her clothes were neatly folded, her designer shoes lined up in rows, her perfume bottles undisturbed. She hadn't taken a single thing he had given her. She hadn't left behind a single drop of her presence. She had stripped 3 years of marriage down to absolute zero, erasing herself from his house as if she had been nothing more than a phantom passing through the halls. Search it again, Sebastian whispered, his voice hollow, echoing off the high ceilings. Don Cross, we checked her bank accounts, Nikolai said hesitantly. She didn't take the settlement funds. She didn't take your black cards. She transferred her father's remaining personal estate into an international trust and closed all local accounts. She left completely clean. Sebastian walked slowly toward the vanity table, his hand shaking uncontrollably, picked up a small velvet box. Inside lay the diamond bracelet he had given her on their 2nd anniversary, the one he had ordered cleared off a busy avenue for. He remembered her smile that night. She had rested her head against his chest, her eyes wide and full of pure, unadulterated trust, telling him she was the luckiest woman in the world. And all the while, he had kept Serena's candid photos hidden in the basement, beneath their feet. All these years, there has only ever been you. Vivienne was a stand-in from the very start. The words he had spoken to Serena in the hospital corridor echoed in his mind, sharp and poisonous, shredding his heart to pieces. He had believed she was a weak, soft bird trapped in his cage. He had believed she loved him so much that she would tolerate any betrayal, any shadow, any insult, as long as he gave her a sweet smile and a lavish gift. He had thought he was the master holding the leash. He didn't know that when a woman who loves deeply decides to leave, she doesn't scream, she doesn't make a scene, and she doesn't leave a single thread for him to pull her back with. Sebastian dropped the velvet box. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, sickening crack. He fell to his knees in the middle of the empty closet, clutching his lower back, letting out a raw, agonizing roar of pure despair that cut through the sound of the thunder outside. 3 months passed. Serena's recovery was nothing short of a medical miracle. Her marrow counts stabilized, her complexion regained its soft, blooming color, and the doctors officially declared her leukemia in full remission. She moved out of the hospital and straight into the guest wing of the Cross estate. To the outside world, Serena Brooks had finally claimed her rightful place as the Don's true woman. The syndicate lieutenants treated her with polite deference, the servants catered to her every whim, and high society whispered that the stand-in wife had finally been discarded for the real treasure. Yet inside the mansion, the air felt like a graveyard. In the grand dining room, Serena sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, wearing a delicate pink cashmere sweater and a diamond necklace Sebastian had personally bought for her 2 years ago. At the head of the table sat Sebastian. In 3 months, he had aged 10 years. His dark hair was lightly silvered at the temples, his jaw sharp and gaunt, his eyes permanently bloodshot. He barely touched the food in front of him, staring blankly at the empty chair across the table, the chair where Vivienne used to sit, softly nagging him to eat his vegetables. Sebastian, Serena spoke, her voice soft and sweet, breaking the heavy silence. She picked up a serving spoon and placed a piece of braised beef into his bowl. You've been working too hard lately. Eat a little meat. The doctor said your body is still weak from the marrow extraction. Sebastian looked down at the piece of beef in his bowl. His stomach turned violently. For 3 years, he had eaten vegetarian alongside Vivienne because her morning sickness turned her stomach at the sight of meat. He had grown so accustomed to her habits, her light meals, her subtle preference for clear broths and green tea, that the heavy scent of braised beef now smelled nauseating. He set his chopsticks down with a quiet, icy click. Take it away, Sebastian said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Serena's smile stiffened slightly. Sebastian, it's your favorite. I asked the chef to prepare it specifically for you. I said take it away, he repeated, his dark eyes rising to lock onto hers. The coldness in his gaze was so absolute, so devoid of the obsession he used to hold for her, that Serena felt a sudden, icy shiver run down her spine. Ever since he had dragged himself out of the hospital 3 months ago, he hadn't touched her. He hadn't held her. He hadn't even looked at her with the fiery, desperate passion he used to show when he stared at her portraits in the basement. He treated her like a fragile, expensive vase, placed on a high shelf, observed from a distance and completely devoid of life. Sebastian, Serena began, her voice trembling slightly as she stood up, walking toward him. Are you still thinking about her? She left you. She aborted your child and ran away. Why do you still care about a stand-in? Bang! Sebastian slammed his palm onto the table so hard the crystal wine glasses shattered, spilling deep red wine across the white linen tablecloth like fresh blood. Don't you ever call her a stand-in again, Sebastian rasped, his voice dropping into a terrifying, murderous pitch. Serena gasped, stumbling back, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. Sebastian, you said it yourself. You told me in the hospital that she was just my shadow. Sebastian stood up slowly. His tall frame cast a long, dark shadow over her. He looked at Serena's face, the soft features, the gentle eyes, the exact physical blueprint he had spent 3 years chasing. And for the first time in his life, he felt absolutely nothing. The obsession that had consumed his youth, the ghost he had chased through portraits and candid photos in a dark basement, had turned into a hollow, meaningless shell. He realized then the terrifying, tragic irony of his own hubris. He hadn't loved Serena for the past 3 years. He had loved the memory of an unfulfilled dream. And while he was chasing that dead dream, he had allowed a real, living, breathing woman, a woman who had loved him with her whole heart, who had stayed by his side through every dark night, who had carried his child to bleed to death emotionally right in front of his eyes. Get out, Sebastian whispered. Serena blinked, her face going translucent. What did you say? Move out of the estate tomorrow morning, Sebastian said, his voice flat, final, and devoid of mercy. I will grant your family a permanent annuity of $5 million a year. But if I ever see your face in this house again, I will ruin the Brooks family completely. He turned his back on her, walking out of the dining room into the cold, dark rain outside, leaving Serena weeping helplessly in the empty hall. 2 years later, the morning sun over Florence, Italy, was warm and golden, casting a soft amber light across the terracotta rooftops and the winding cobblestone streets near the Palazzo Pitti. In a quiet, high-ceilinged workshop on the 2nd floor of an ancient stone building, the air smelled of beeswax, aged oak, and varnish. Vivienne sat before a massive 16th-century oil painting, holding a fine badger hair brush, her dark hair tied back in a loose, elegant bun. She wore a simple linen apron over a cream-colored silk blouse and dark trousers. Her skin was healthy, flushed with a subtle, radiant glow, her eyes clear, sharp, and entirely unburdened. Over the past 2 years, Vivienne had built a quiet, highly respected career as an independent art restorer for European private collections. She worked on her own terms, lived in a sunlit apartment overlooking the Arno River, and spent her evenings reading on her balcony with a glass of Tuscan wine. The painful past, the 99 unanswered calls, the cold basement, the abortion clinic, the mafia don, had turned into a distant, faded memory buried deep beneath the sea. The heavy oak door of the workshop clicked open. A tall, handsome Italian man in a tailored light gray suit walked in carrying 2 cups of fresh espresso and a paper bag from a local bakery. Buongiorno, Vivienne, Lorenzo smiled, his warm hazel eyes twinkling as he set the coffee down on her work table. The museum director from Milan just called. He wants you to lead the restoration of the Medici collection next month. Vivienne set her brush down, smiling warmly as she took the porcelain cup. Thank you, Lorenzo. Did you tell him I only take 2 projects a season? I did, Lorenzo laughed, sitting on the edge of a vacant table, looking at her with quiet, unpretentious admiration. He said he's willing to wait 6 months, if it means getting your hands on the canvas. Vivienne took a slow sip of the rich, hot coffee, leaning back against her stool, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over her shoulders. This was the life she had fought for. A life where her hands held value, where her work was respected, and where her happiness depended on no one but herself. By the way, Lorenzo added, pulling a dark invitation from his coat pocket. The Florence International Heritage Gala is tonight. The host requested your presence as the lead restorer. Will you come with me? Vivienne looked at the gold embossed card, then smiled effortlessly. Of course. Let me finish this varnish coat first. The grand ballroom of the Palazzo Pitti was illuminated by 1,000 crystal chandeliers, reflecting off gilded mirrors and grand Renaissance frescoes. Florence's top art patrons, European aristocrats and international diplomats, mingled over champagne while a live string quartet played softly in the background. Vivienne walked through the hall on Lorenzo's arm. She wore a backless, emerald green silk gown that draped flawlessly over her slender frame. Her dark hair fell in soft waves over one shoulder and around her neck sat a delicate, unbranded antique gold choker, a piece she had bought herself at an auction in Venice last year. She looked breathtakingly radiant, poised, confident, and entirely commanding. Signorina Carter. The elderly museum director greeted her warmly, holding up a glass of Prosecco. The pride of our restoration department. Let me introduce you to our primary benefactor for the Eastern Wing restoration. The director turned toward a tall figure standing near the balcony doors. This is Don Sebastian Cross, head of the Cross Syndicate from. The director's voice faded into the background sound of the violins. Vivienne's steps did not falter. Her smile remained perfectly polite, perfectly composed. Standing 10 feet away, holding a crystal glass of whiskey, was Sebastian. He was dressed in a pristine black tuxedo, but the man beneath it looked like a haunting specter of his former self. He was thinner, his features carved out of hard, gaunt marble, his eyes dark, hollow, and filled with a permanent, agonizing exhaustion. When his eyes landed on Vivienne, his crystal glass slipped from his fingers. Crash! The glass shattered against the marble floor, amber liquor and ice splashing across the shoes of the surrounding guests. The crowd gasped in quiet shock, but Sebastian didn't hear a single sound. His dark eyes were locked onto her face, her radiant skin, her clear, calm eyes, her slender waist that no longer bore the shadow of the child he had destroyed. Vivienne. His voice came out as a strangled, raspy gasp, so low it barely carried over the music. Lorenzo looked at Sebastian, his brow furrowing slightly, sensing the dangerous, suffocating aura radiating from the man. He stepped slightly in front of Vivienne, his posture protective. Is everything all right, Signorina Carter? Vivienne looked at Sebastian. Her dark eyes held no hatred. They held no bitterness, no fear, and no shock. She looked at the feared Don of the Cross Syndicate, the man who had held her in his arms for 3 years, the man who had torn her heart to shreds, with the exact same polite, detached indifference she would give to a stranger who had accidentally dropped a glass. I am fine, Lorenzo, Vivienne said smoothly, her voice clear, melodious, and carrying through the quiet space between them. She turned her head to the museum director, offering a graceful nod. Director, if you will excuse us, Lorenzo and I need to review the lighting layout for the Eastern Gallery. She turned on her heel, her emerald gown trailing behind her, and walked away into the crowd without looking back a second time. Sebastian stood frozen amidst the shattered glass, his heart exploding into a million jagged, bleeding pieces. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't slapped him. She hadn't even flinched. She had looked at him as if he were nothing more than empty space. At midnight, a sudden spring downpour washed over the ancient stone streets of Florence. Vivienne stepped out of the side entrance of the Palazzo Pitti, holding a dark umbrella, waiting for Lorenzo to pull the car around from the courtyard. The quiet street was empty, illuminated only by the warm amber light of the gas lamps reflecting off the wet cobblestones. Footsteps rushed through the rain, heavy, desperate, and unsteady. Vivienne. Sebastian surged out of the shadows, ignoring the pouring rain soaking through. His expensive tuxedo, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his face pale as paper. Lorenzo's security team immediately moved to intercept him, but Vivienne raised a hand, signaling them to hold. "It's fine," Vivienne said calmly. She walked forward 2 steps, holding her umbrella firmly, sheltered beneath its canvas, looking at the man standing in the rain 3 feet away. Sebastian looked at her, his chest heaving, his dark eyes bloodshot and drenched in tears that mixed with the rainwater pouring down his cheeks. "Vivienne," he choked out, falling to his knees right there on the wet cobblestones, ignoring the mud soaking into his trousers. "Vivienne, I found you. I finally found you." He lifted his hands toward her, trembling, reaching for the hem of her emerald gown, but he didn't dare touch her. "I was wrong," he sobbed, his voice breaking into raw, agonizing shrieks that echoed through the narrow Italian alley. "I was a fool. A monster. I threw away Serena. I kicked her out of the house 2 years ago. There is no one else. Vivienne. There has never been anyone else in my heart since the day you left." He pressed his forehead against the cold, wet cobblestones at her feet, weeping bitterly like a street beggar. "Come back home, baby, please. I'll give you the syndicate. I'll give you my life. I'll build you 100 avenues. Just let me look at you, let me hold you once more." The rain poured down, splashing against the stone, washing over his bowing shoulders. Vivienne looked down at him. She looked at his trembling hands. She looked at his weeping, broken form. 2 years ago, she would have given her life to see him kneel for her. Now, she felt nothing. Not an ounce of satisfaction, not a drop of pity. "Sebastian," Vivienne spoke, her voice smooth, serene, and crystal clear against the sound of the rain. Sebastian snapped his head up, his eyes filled with a terrifying, desperate hope. "Vivienne, do you know why I didn't cry when I found out about Serena?" she asked softly. Sebastian's breath hitched. "Because I realized that the man I loved for 3 years never actually existed," Vivienne said, every word landing like a surgical incision. "You were just the illusion I built out of my own foolishness. And when my father died and you cut off those 99 calls, the illusion died too." She took a step back, pulling her gown away from his reaching fingers. "You gave Serena your bone marrow, Sebastian," she smiled faintly, an icy edge touching her eyes. "And I gave you your freedom. We are even." No, Vivienne. "We are not even," Sebastian screamed, scrambling forward on his knees, his hands clawing at the wet stones. "You took the baby. You took my heart." "I didn't take your heart, Sebastian," Vivienne whispered, turning her back on him as Lorenzo's car pulled up to the curb. "You never had one to give." She stepped into the back seat of the car. The door shut with a quiet, final click. The sedan pulled away smoothly into the Tuscan night, its red taillights reflecting off the wet pavement before vanishing into the dark. Sebastian lay flat on his face in the mud, clutching his chest, screaming her name into the empty Italian rain until his throat bled, realizing that he had built his own eternal hell, and the door was locked from the outside. 5 years later, the Cross estate in the northern province sat quiet under a heavy blanket of winter snow. The grand mansion was dark, save for a single light glowing from the second-floor master bedroom. Inside the room, the temperature was freezing. The fireplace had been cold for months. Sebastian sat in a wheelchair beside the window, looking out at the dark, snow-covered gates. His health had collapsed entirely over the past 3 years. The severe toll of the marrow donation, combined with chronic alcohol abuse and relentless, unyielding insomnia, had left his body frail and broken at 37. He could no longer walk without assistance. The syndicate was now managed entirely by Nikolai and the board of lieutenants. Sebastian had abandoned all interest in power, money, or territorial war. He spent his days sitting by the window, holding a small, faded photograph, a photo taken 5 years ago at a charity gala, showing a 22-year-old girl with a bright, innocent smile, leaning against his shoulder, believing she was the luckiest woman in the world. A soft knock came at the door. Nikolai stepped inside, holding a European newspaper. "Don Cross," Nikolai said quietly, setting the paper on the small table beside the wheelchair. The International Design Journal published their annual review today. Sebastian's gaunt fingers slowly reached for the paper. On the front page was a large, vibrant color photograph. A 30-year-old woman stood on a sunlit balcony overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, wearing a simple linen dress, holding the hand of a handsome Italian man, and a little 3-year-old girl with bright, curious eyes and a radiant smile. Below the photo was a simple caption: "Master Restorer Vivienne Carter Vance celebrates new architectural foundation in Venice." Sebastian stared at the photograph. He looked at her clear, laughing eyes. He looked at the warm, protective hand of the man standing beside her. He looked at the happy, thriving life she had built, a life where his name did not exist, where his pain was entirely irrelevant, and where his memory held no weight. A single, clear tear slipped from Sebastian's hollow eye, falling onto the newsprint, blurring the image of her face. He closed his eyes, pulling the cold blanket closer around his shivering shoulders, letting the silence of the dark mansion consume him. She was free under the Tuscan sun, and he was left alone in the mausoleum of his own making, carrying the burden of his obsession unto the end of his days.